Hey everyone, today we're covering how to create mod kits for our 3D car models. This is part of a series where I'm covering car modeling from start to finish. Today's video focuses specifically on the modeling workflows for how to create custom mod kits that you'd find for resto mods or implementing your own original concepts. This series is targeted for beginner to advanced skill level in 3D modeling. Maya 2022.1 will be used for this tutorial, but the workflows can be applied to any 3D software as well as any version of Maya. So with that, let's get started. Alright, so here we are in Maya, and you can see the progression that we've been making since the start of this series. In the last video, we covered sports wheels, so we modeled the tires and the rims, and we needed that for the next video, which is creating the custom mods. I am creating the resto mod based on Sunkang's Datsun 240Z here. So now that I knew or I modeled the wheels, I can go ahead and start modeling the mod kit. Now, I wanted to cover the specific workflows, but before I can get into the workflows, there's something very important that I need to cover, which is called vehicle stance. If I go ahead and grab the last part of the vehicle, which was modeled based off of the blueprints, this is what the difference is between the most recent vehicle. You can see how different the stance of the vehicle and how it sits on the tires and the wheels that I had modeled, right? With the most recent version and the version that's based off of Sunkang's model, we can see how close it sits to these tires here. So I made sure to be very specific. I was able to model these to the right specification, as you can see how different they are compared to the much smaller wheels, rims, and tires from probably a stock or maybe a differently modified Datsun 240Z. But we're definitely going for this one, which gives us a much more aggressive stance, right? So if I go here and take a look at this, the main thing, like I said, was grabbing these wheels and really bringing them up. So I'll go ahead and hide all of these other parts here, and we can start to take a look and focus on this. And not only that, is the rear wheels are a bit wider than the front wheels. So I did go ahead and widen those out a little bit, again, to give us a much more aggressive stance for the vehicle. Another thing you want to keep in mind is how the body sits on the wheels. Sometimes you'll have what's called a vehicle rake. So if I actually go ahead and select this, you'll see that my pivot here is about the front. And sometimes you'll get vehicles that are much more, rotated or raked by a very small degree here. But that gives you kind of, again, that aggressive look where the front of the vehicle is dipping down while the rear is raised. And that's all based on whatever type of suspension is based on the vehicle. All right. Now, I didn't go ahead and do this. I might do that at the very end just to give it just that final, more aggressive look. All right. Now that we got that out of the way, let's take a look now and focus on the workflows for creating these mod kits. You can see the mod kits that I've went ahead and added, right? And I'm going to be showing the overall workflow, and then I'll be covering, or I should say combining that with time lapses. And we can kind of see how everything is all set up. I still need to update this kind of bumper piece here on the front, but I still am just using this as a representative piece. That's about the last piece that I have to create. So, and you can see there's none on the back here. So the main thing that I did, and this is a workflow that I use for building off of geometry, is of course to use what's called live surface and then using quad draw. So I'll cover this workflow real quick and then we'll jump into some time lapses. So what this does is I can go ahead and select a cylinder here and increase the radius quite a bit. Go ahead and rotate that in position like so. And just rotate that 90 degrees. And I'll go ahead and put this cylinder here in position. And I'm just going to kind of center that to the tire here. So I'll just kind of use this quick align tool here and move this out like so. Now you can see that these mod kits are really just butted up right against the body here. They're really tight up against, and it makes it look like it's been, fabricated and manufactured specifically for this vehicle. That's where using Make Live is going to be very, very helpful. So I'll go ahead and increase the radius, and I'll go ahead and actually jump to the side view here. I want to go ahead and hide this piece here, the fender piece, so that way we can just take a look at this. And I'll go ahead and align that from this position as well. And we can go ahead and increase that a bit more to something like this. Now, I do want to grab quickly the body that I had previously before I started making some alterations to it. All right, so I went ahead and grabbed that real quick, and I'll go ahead and hide the modified version, and we'll just focus on the original. So, like I said, I'll go ahead and kind of prepare this cylinder here, and what I want to do is just kind of cut this half piece here, and then scale this, make it a little bit thicker, and I'll delete the other side here. And I can control click and then delete the back side. So we have something like this. Then what I can do is kind of grab the piece here running on the back of the cylinder, and using W, I'll go ahead and hold here, control middle mouse, just like that. So you can kind of see how now I'm getting kind of this nice clean fender look. And then I can go ahead and bring this down by holding shift and move. There we go. So now I can just kind of delete this piece here, the inner piece, and you can kind of see what we're left with here. And this is how I started the fender, right? And what I want to do is kind of get this in position. Of course, we're always going to be looking at a reference to kind of see how tightly this sits. So I got all sorts of angles that I've been using. You'll see me use that in the time lapses and jumping back and forth here. So I kind of basically make that about planar here, and this will work just fine. And what I can do now is, you can start to move this closer to the body, right? So I'm going to move these edges here a little bit closer just to kind of help. And you'll notice I'm not using quad draw quite yet, but instead I'm going to use another tool, which is called Conform here. All right. So once we kind of bring things a lot closer, and I make sure that everything's about the right position, and I can just kind of deselect the edges I don't want, or select the edges I do, and I can maybe hold control middle mouse again just to make that a little bit wider. And I can bring these in and bring these in a little bit tighter, again moving on the normal. So I'm just kind of making these adjustments here. So maybe move these down like so. All right, great. So that's kind of working well. And then what I can do is, of course, move that back out. Now I can set this surface to live. By doing that, you can either hold right click with nothing selected and just do make live like so, or you can select it and use one of the snaps here, right, or next to the snaps here, and it's this last magnet, which is make selected object live, and there you go. Now with that selected, I can go ahead and, or that set live, I can select the edges like this, and you can see that the live surface, if I turn on wireframe unshaded, is green. I can go ahead now and go to mesh, conform, and there you go. And that snaps it right to this surface, which is incredibly, incredibly useful. So as you can imagine, you can do this with any sort of object here, and you can go ahead and get the overall look and feel for the type of shape that you want to create. And once you snap it, you can, of course, go either jump into quad draw mode and make adjustments here. I can just kind of left click and position this, or you can just use standard modeling tools as long as this is enabled with your live surface. And then there you go. And then that's one of the key things that I've used, especially just to kind of build on top of my geometry. And then I can continue on with covering the next set of workflows. All right, so now we're back to looking at the final model. And the key thing that I wanted to bring up before we start getting into the time lapses and workflows is that you'll notice that I will be using all of the workflows that I've been covering over the past, 6 and 7 videos, where I'm going to be blocking in, I'm going to be refining and adding details, I'm going to be paneling, and I just go through this over and over again for each of these new parts, right? You'll see that I have this that looks pretty complex, but all I did for this was start with very simple block out, and then I just progressively and iteratively add in more and more detail. And so it takes away the complexity for creating something that looks complex, but when you break it down into these workflows, it becomes very, very simple, and you just get better and better at it over time. You'll see the paneling here with the wheel wells here and the fender flares matching up really nicely with the original body. And then you'll see one here where I actually cover kind of a different type of paneling where it's kind of going inside and underneath here, and then it's bolted on. All right. Now, I will be covering in the next video, how to add in, all the door handles and bolts and everything. So that's kind of the final thing I'll be adding, or one of the final things I'll be adding, plus the lights. All right. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into the time lapses. All right, so here we are in Maya with the narrated time lapse, and you can see I start off with the same thing, just repositioning those tires, getting the vehicle stance right before I start working on those fender flares. Now I'm going ahead and adjusting and creating that cylinder, putting in position, adding in segments, and then I'll go ahead and delete faces and move edges in position and start to position them on the vehicle using Make Live and Conform, which is what we just covered at the beginning of this video. So once all of that is set up, I duplicate it and put it in the rear of the vehicle, so I have that. And then now I enable Make Live, and we're quad drawing at this point. So I'm going through, adjusting, moving vertices around, getting the right form here, which is what matters for the blackout phase, and making sure things look correct. Now, I do end up missing a couple of things, but that's no big deal. I end up checking and correcting and fixing that later. So now we're just positioning and finishing the blockout and working on the front of the vehicle now. And, I'm going through just adjusting edges, making sure that the surface, the overall surface is nice and smooth, because I'm going to be adding in a lot more detail. And to get a good sense of profile, I go ahead and mirror things over. Then I go ahead now and we're cutting in some of that detail. So now we're starting the transition where we're in the blockout phase, we're refining the blockout and just adding detail as we move along. You can still see that the form is very simple. I'm not jumping the gun and cutting in detail unless I'm absolutely ready to. And then now, once I have the form, I am cutting in that headlight detail. So this was a little bit tricky of a piece, but I had to make sure to add in extra geometry because this thing is very, very complex. There's a lot of cuts, a lot of holes in this fender piece. So, I'm going through and making sure I add in enough edges to make sure that things are going to subdivide correctly. And as you can see, I go ahead and just simply finish cutting in the headlight detail, and then moving and using a lot of edge slide as well. All right, so yeah, we're just moving forward, and I realized I needed to do the panel on the base vehicle. So I missed a panel, so no big deal. I go ahead and prepare the edge and use my double beveling technique, where I do that initial bevel, then bevel again, so it holds that form and gives us that nice detail. So make sure to check that out in one of my previous videos on how to master paneling. All right, so I go ahead and extrude that, and I end up removing that bottom piece since I no longer need it. And then I go ahead and start adjusting that bumper piece to put it in position. Once I do that, you can start to see kind of the iterative process taking place. So I'm just continuing to add detail. I'm using insert edge flow with the multi-cut. So I'm multi-cutting, inserting the edge, and using the option insert with edge flow. Then I'm cleaning up, making sure everything looks good, separate out the headlight geometry. I'm going to work on this later, but I have that block out there so I can start working around it. Now I start to work my way on the front of the vehicle with that front fender piece. And I was having a hard time with symmetry modifier, so I ended up using the duplicate special with instancing. So that's why you kind of see me delete and move or redelete and re-instance the model. So I go ahead and now just cutting in some of that detail, that front piece with the multi-cut tool and extrusion. Now I do this a couple different times to really make sure that I get it right. And even at the end, I think I still need to make some adjustments to it, but all in all, it's there and looks good compared to the reference. I do a little bit of cleanup, and now I'm starting to make my way toward the bottom of the fender flares and the air dam and spoiler. So we're heading down, and now I'm starting to cut in. You'll see that I'm actually separating some of these edges, and now I'm extruding in. So this one was a pretty straightforward process. It's complex looking shape, but simple form. So, I go ahead and do that. Now I did notice that it was too, it wasn't, I should say, thick enough or wide enough or tall enough, I should say. So, but I cut that in, and I just said I'll make those adjustments later, which I do in the video. All right, so I'm adding in some holding line creases based off of the reference that I see, and then I notice that it has some more shape towards the front, so the front bottom lip starts to come out. And so that's why you see me pulling out those edges, and we're just kind of going now through, and I'm punching out this little hole, which is pretty easy. I just make sure that I have a good 8 sides. I don't like to do circular shapes with only a 4-sided quad, so that's why I at least make sure I have 6 or 8. It just smooths better. All right, so now we're working our way back to the fender flares here, and it's about time where I want to start really refining, going from the blockout refinement stage and really start to add in a lot more detail. So I start to, making sure that this is right on top of the geometry. So I'm doing some snapping, some adjustments, and I'm doing some edge cleanup here as well to get some better form on the fender flare. So cleaning the bottom piece, as you see, and then now I do extrude to give it some thickness, and then I do some cleanup as well, and then multi-cutting in my holding lines, a little bit of edge cleanup, and going from there. I then jump to the back rear fender flare, which is the overall same workflow, and I'm just applying it to the rear. Once, this is a much simpler shape. It goes by a lot quicker. So I'm just focusing on the overall form and using Make Live and making those adjustments to it goes pretty high up on the hip line of the vehicle on the Datsun here. So then I go ahead and jump to the bottom, start to get in that crease line. And I do offset it. I do move the edges away. So after I do the conform, I move them off just a little bit so I have enough room for that lip. And then I go ahead and start to work on the rest of the form there. And I come back after and start to do some paneling on that. But you'll see me, jumping back and forth. Sometimes you just get sick of a specific area, so you want to make those adjustments. All right, so I needed to do some cleanup here, and I'm just adjusting the edge flow and topology. I'm making sure that, there was I needed just more edges, so I just adjusted the topology and edge flow there. Cleaned up some things, makes it look a lot better when it subdivides, and adding in those crease lines. I need to actually make an adjustment here on that crease line on the fender flare, so I'll end up going back and kind of correcting that, getting a better shape. All right, so now we're, taking a look at the headlight area, and now I start to do the paneling technique. So I double panel, I do my extrusion, separate, and then just clean up those edges. So I'm starting to work my way now into paneling after I've got all those main details in. And then here is that, different type of paneling where I do some extrusion. So I wanted to clean up some geometry at the top that loops around at the bottom. Clean up and straighten those edges, and then I extract geometry, extrude the edge, the top panel, then I extrude again to get the thickness there. Then I select the vertices and start snapping them on the other panel Then I duplicate faces, flip the normal, and reattach it to the other object. So I can cover that maybe in more detail later, but that is the overall workflow. And then I had to make some larger scale adjustments there on the overall form that I missed. And then I end up going back and reinstancing and duplicate special there. Once I've done that, I go ahead and jump back to the rear, and I'm going to start adding in that paneling, that cut line, and I'm just using the reference and same exact workflow. I'm double paneling or double beveling to create the panels. And things are starting to look pretty good there. And once I do that, I extrude and then clean up those last corner edges and faces. So now we're about done wrapping up here. This is where I noticed that I didn't bring down the front air dam low enough. So I bring that down and then make the necessary adjustments. And I left that in here just so you can see, I miss some things sometimes. Sometimes you get a little bit too close, but you always want to make sure to just keep checking your reference. All right, so that brings us to the end of the video. I hope you found this time-lapse driven method more helpful. It took about a couple hours to create all of these details and everything, so I didn't want to do another hour-long video. Instead, we'll keep it short and just focus on the workflows again. You'll be able to see all of the step-by-step workflows, and I was really excited about this one because it shows, again, to recap, me going through and applying all of these workflows to creating these models, these complex models. All right. So if you found this helpful and stuck around this long, thank you so much. I appreciate, a like or comment. Let me know. If there's anything else you want me to cover in further detail, subscribe if you want me to see this through. And I should have a couple more a couple more parts here. I should have just a couple more videos to wrap up here. So the last ones will be doing headlights, tail lights, and then adding in the door handles, badging, and stuff like that. So I plan to keep this limited to just a 10-part series. So next video should be about 2 or 3 more. But we're almost there. So thanks again. I will see you guys around.